Welcome to Sports Spectrum, the sports and faith podcast that brings Jesus back into the conversation. Here's your host, Jason Romano.
This episode of the Sports Spectrum podcast with Rob Likens, Arizona State football offensive coordinator, is brought to you by Compassion International. It's $38 a month, and it is the opportunity for you and I to make a difference in a child's life. $38 releases a child from poverty. That's the great work being done by Compassion International. And what they provide is safe water, education, medical care, even safe housing for $38 a month. Your sponsorship, releasing a child from poverty. Over 66 years of experience Compassion has, and they've found that the most effective way to care for children in need is through the local church. That's why they partner with more than 7,000 local churches in 25 countries to deliver God's loving care to children in need, one child at a time. Make that difference. Go to compassion.com/sportspectrum. Compassion.com/sportspectrum. $38 a month. Release a child from poverty today. Joining us on the podcast today is Rob Likens. He's the Arizona State football offensive coordinator and quarterbacks coach. And Rob has been around this game of football for a while, over 25 years of coaching experience, places like Temple, Central Connecticut State, Cal, Kansas, and he arrived in Arizona with Arizona State and the Sun Devils in 2017. And I love Rob. I mean, I honestly didn't know a whole lot about him, but started following him on Twitter and saw this was a man who had a passion for football, a passion for people, and a love for God. And hey, if you tell me those three things, you're probably going to end up on this podcast at some point. And just a big fan of how Rob carries himself. And I love talking to coaches, especially coaches at high levels like Arizona State, about their walk, their journey through both sports and through faith. And I know that Rob works for Herman Edwards, who's the head coach at Arizona State, the football program there. And Herman and I worked together for many years at ESPN, and he's one of my favorite people of all time. And I'm not the only one that said that. In fact, Rob will talk quite a bit about Herman Edwards here on this podcast. But I thought, what a great interview, what a great opportunity, especially now as we tape this interview in the spring, in a time where football has kind of quieted a little bit, even though Rob's job does not stop. He's out recruiting as we speak and then getting ready for the summer. And then 2019 will be here before we know it, in the start of the college football season. So take a listen. A really fun interview here with Rob Likens, Arizona State football offensive coordinator and quarterbacks coach, here on Sports Spectrum's podcast. Rob Likens, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Jason, man. I'm so excited, fired up to do this. Been looking forward to it for a while.
Me too. I'm very excited to talk to you, and so glad we started our connection on Twitter, and that's a beautiful place to start. But now we actually get to have a podcast and kind of get to know your journey a little bit. Let's start with now, I guess. What's the offseason like for you as an assistant coach, as an offensive coordinator? We're taping this late April. It's actually Good Friday that we're taping this interview here in late April. What's the offseason like for you right about now?
Well, it's a little skewed because I'm very spoiled because I work for possibly the greatest head football coach in America, Herm Edwards, which I know that you know him.
Oh, yeah.
And, every day in the office is just so positive, so energetic. It's just so much fun to come to the office every day. So basically what we're doing right now is the kids are working out. They're in the weight room. Herm came up with a great idea to finish spring practice. We finished spring practice February the 28th. So we are way ahead of the game as far as getting organized to go out and recruit next week. So on Monday, or actually Sunday, Easter, we'll all be flying out and getting to our prospective recruiting areas, and we'll be going out recruiting over the next 5 weeks. So right now we're watching cut-ups of the season, getting ready for camp and getting our scripts together, getting ready for the summer, and we're getting organized in recruiting.
Coach, I don't think people who are your casual fan, including myself in many ways, know about that side of it, the recruiting side of the job, and that's a grind. It's not always glamorous. Can you tell us, as you get ready to go out and recruit, you've been doing this a while, so you know this recruiting world well. What's that like? What does that entail? Obviously, don't name names if you can't, but just entail or explain what that entails as you're going out and recruiting and visiting prospects.
Yeah, sure. And with the emergence of social media has completely changed all of this recruiting stuff, because where it used to be you were allowed one phone call in the month of May, so you could talk to juniors, rising seniors that are going to be seniors the next year,
right?
And you could talk to them, just kind of find out a little bit about them, and then you watch them play your senior year. Then you extend scholarships. Well, now with the early scholarship offers, we're offering kids in the 10th grade now. Social media, there is no rules on really how much you can text juniors and seniors. So you're constantly texting, communicating with these guys. And if you're recruiting, say, I personally recruit quarterbacks, and say I want to recruit 10 quarterbacks. My job's easy because I just got to keep up with 10 guys on social media, text them, all of that good stuff. And but if you're like an offensive line coach and you're recruiting 50 offensive linemen, your nights, your days, your mornings, your free time is filled with social media, keeping up with them, texting them, trying to remember what conversations you had with what person, and going out to the schools, visiting them, go watching practice, getting that all organized. It is a year-round job. It never stops.
Rob Likens is our guest here on the Sports Spectrum podcast. Coaches that are trying to break into this business, as they hear, I know it's hard, and so many. I was just recently at the Final Four in Minneapolis for basketball, and I just saw at the coaches convention guys there really trying to market themselves, I guess, and trying to get that next break and that next job. Can you talk about the grind that you've gone through? I know those early years weren't easy for you as you were building up your coaching resume and just kind of trying to find your way into this coaching world.
Oh, absolutely. So, I started out in high school. Soon as I graduated from Mississippi State, I was wanting, to get into the coaching field. So I went into high school, was an algebra teacher, for goodness sake. And at the high school level, I taught 5 algebra classes in a row. And then I, went out to football practice. And I tell everybody that's how I got into college coaching is teaching 5 math classes in a row on a daily basis. that made me get out of the high school level. So, but I wanted to be a college coach. And so I went the route of what they call a graduate assistant. And, I made like maybe $5,000 a year. And, you hope to do a year or 2 years of that and catch on with somebody. But, I happened to go to a place called the University of North Alabama where we were winning national championships, and I couldn't get anybody to leave on the staff so I could get a job. And so
right.
I actually ended up being a graduate assistant for 6 years, just waiting, sleeping on people's couches, living all over the place, just trying to get my foot in the door. And I did that for 6 straight years. And it was, it really tests you. It really, you got to ask that question, is this what I really want? And, I tell young guys, the biggest advice that I give to them wanting to get in is, number one, man, God's got to be your agent, man. If God's not your agent, then you're in trouble. Because if you don't have faith in this profession, I don't see how you make it. And the second piece of advice I tell them is you got to outlast people. You got to just outlast them, and you got to be willing to hold on when others aren't willing to hold on. You got to be willing to take out loans, not make any money, and just hang in there until you get your foot in the door. And then it's up to you, once you get that foot in the door, what you're going to make out of your career. And so I ended up getting my first job, full-time job, 7 years later after I got into the business of college football at Temple University. And my career just kind of took off from there.
That just doesn't sound glamorous. And you're grinding and you're fighting through, sleeping on floors, doing what it takes. How close were you at all in that 6-year span to not wanting to do this anymore and walking away?
I always believe this, that God, he knows what he's doing. And I don't think if I didn't have such a great experience at the place that I was trying to hold on and get a full-time job, because we were winning. We were the number one ranked team in the country.
Yeah.
We were doing things nobody had ever done before. We won 3 straight national championships. We were the first college scholarship college at any level to ever do that at the time. We were the first Division II football team ever to be invited to the White House to meet President Clinton at the time. So those things, the success, and I think that kept me in it. If we were losing all of those times and I was sleeping on floors and doing all that, man, I might be in another profession right now.
Coach, tell us about your faith. You've mentioned God and having that strong faith as your agent. Tell us how that faith was birthed for you, where it kind of became real to you.
Man, Jason, I would love to. Great story. I love telling my story about how God stepped in and saved my life. I was actually at that place, the University of North Alabama. It was 1993, and I had been there for 2 years. And I had always, kind of been a fan of Jesus, if you know what I mean. I was in the stands watching, and I would cheer for Jesus, but I didn't really want to be involved and get involved and be totally committed and be a team member. And so, I woke up, one day and I was just like, man, this isn't, I'm 20 some years old, prime of my life. And there's something just drastically missing, that this is not it. This isn't what life is all about, and there's something missing. And it just kept getting a bigger hole in my soul. I could just feel it. And I ended up really kind of in depression, thinking about life, thinking about these things. And there was something missing. And I was given a Bible by my mom for graduation. And I remember, I used it, as most people do, as a coffee, stand ornament, and it was in my dorm room. I actually lived in the dorm with the players as a graduate assistant. And I remember taking my Bible, and I'm just going to be just truthful and graphic here. I remember holding my Bible, and I remember looking up into the sky, and I remember saying, God, this is all a bunch of bull, what, because it wasn't real to me. Like, I would pray, but nothing would happen. I would this and nothing would happen. And I took my Bible and I threw it up against the wall. It hit my wall, bounced, opened up, landed on my bed. And the Bible that I had it was a one column Bible that everything was written straight across the page. And then, but whenever it had the Lord says words, it would narrow the column. And so I just kind of glanced over at the Bible, and this column just shot off the page at me, and I walked over to it. And I didn't even know there was a book of Jeremiah in the Bible, to be honest with you. And it was Jeremiah 17, 5-8.
Yeah.
And it said, this is what the Lord says. Cursed is the one who trusts in man, who depends on flesh for his strength, and whose heart turns away from the Lord. He will be like a bush in the wastelands. He will not see prosperity when it comes. He will dwell in the parched places of the desert, in a salt land where no one lives. And I remember looking up to God, and I was like, I couldn't describe my life any better than the writer of that right there. And I said, God, what do I do? And in my spirit, I felt God saying, keep reading. And the very next sentence said, but blessed is the man who trusts in God, whose confidence is in him. He will be like a tree planted by the waters that sends its roots out by the stream. It does not fear when heat comes. Its leaves are always green. It has no worries in a year of drought and never fails to bear fruit. And I said, God, that is exactly what I want in my life. I want my life to not fear when the heat comes. I want to always be productive. I want to always be energetic. I want to always be in a good, productive mood. And I went right across the street. I opened up my office door, turned on the lights, got on my knees. I gave my life over to Jesus Christ the second week of September in 1993. And man, my life has never been the same.
I love that. And it's a great, great story. And I love when God does, unique things in the lives of people to draw them closer to him. And that Jeremiah 17, 5-8 is also listed. I have this as one of my questions, so you brought it up in your Twitter bio, which I thought was great, and being open about why that is. And that probably allows you to have an opportunity to share that story, right? By putting that in your Twitter bio, would you say?
That's exactly right. And that's why I put it there. I want people to ask me about that, and it gives me a chance to share that story. Because I think people they just need to know that God is real, man. God is real. This isn't a made up thing. I mean, I know it because I lived it, and nobody can change my mind on the fact that he completely, totally changed my life from the inside out. And I love sharing that.
Yeah, it's a great story. And I wonder how now, as you've been coaching for a while, and you mentioned Coach Herm, and I want to talk about Herm in a second, but just how does that faith help you go through the way that you coach every day, whether it's the off season right now or gearing up for a big Pac-12 battle, against UCLA or Arizona? How does that faith shape you and how you go about approaching the way you coach every day?
It gives me the proper perspective. That is everything, because an improper perspective can distort reality. And so it continues to give me an eternal perspective. Now, Jason, I'm not perfect. I'm like any other competitive coach or player. The walls sometimes close in on me, and I start concentrating and seeing the wrong things. I just win at all costs. But man, my faith constantly brings me back to, man, the winning. That's not it, man. And the greatest story. I love the parable that Jesus spoke about, the rich fool in the book of Luke. Where I read that over and over and over again. Where a guy comes up to Jesus, he's walking through the crowds, and some guy just randomly says, "Hey, Jesus, tell my brother to divide my inheritance with me." And you could almost sense Jesus was like, "You mean that's the one question you have an opportunity to be on the earth at the same time that God came down in human form, and you're going to walk up to him, and that's the one question you're going to ask him. Can I get some stuff?" And he said, "Man, be careful. All right. Be careful, because life isn't about possessions." And it just constantly keeps me, when I get off track, because I do get off track, my faith brings me right back into, man, it's not about that. It's about the lives that you change. It's about the kids' lives. And then so I can stop, I can look around, and I can say, is this kid over here, is he hurting? This kid over here, am I helping him out? Am I just looking at him as a football player, or am I looking at him as one of God's children? And I think that's my faith. That's what my faith does, man. It keeps me on the right track on my perspective.
Coach, what's the toughest challenge maybe that you face each day as a coach? Maybe it's a spiritual challenge. Maybe it's just a challenge of being a coach in the pressures that come with that, I guess. But what's the toughest challenge that you think you face every day?
It's when you get to this level, I've coached at every level. But when you get to the level of, 1A, and you're in the Power 5 and all that stuff, you feel that pressure to maintain and keep. Hey, man, I want to keep my job. I want to keep that.
Yeah.
And so you start feeling the pressures. And so it's the pull of the world, when the world says, this is how you be successful. And God says, no. This is how you be successful. And not only that, I don't want you to worry about that other stuff. And so that's where the rubber meets the road. That's where your faith is put into. That's, as Herm says all the time, words and actions. It's easy for me to get on this podcast, talk about Jesus and be energetic and all that stuff. But when I'm starting to feel the pull of the world, I'm starting to feel the pressures of this job, do I put my faith into action? I got to actually live that faith out behind closed doors, and just me and God are the only ones that know. That is the hardest thing on a daily basis, is to not believe in the world system of what being successful is living my faith out every day.
It's so true. And you mentioned Herm. I love Herm. I mean, he's probably one of my favorite people to ever work with in my career at ESPN. It's actually my last job. When I was working with the NFL as a talent booker, I did that for 9 years, and a social media producer. I sat and watched the Broncos against the Panthers in the Super Bowl 3-4 years ago, whatever that Super Bowl was. I think that was right. Super Bowl 50. And it was me and it was Herm. And we were in a room and that was it. I was watching it with nobody else. He was watching it with nobody else. And it was part of a social media thing that we were doing. And he was just feeding me quotes and feeding me analysis as he's watching this game. And it was one of my great memories in 17 years at ESPN because there was nobody around. It was just me and Herm watching the Super Bowl together.
Oh,
one
wow.
One of the great guys that I've ever worked with, always up at 4 a.m., high energy, passionate, caring, all these things that I could explain. I'm sure you can echo some of these things now working under him with Arizona State, working with him. What's it been like for him, for you to work with him on a daily basis and the impact he's made on your life?
Oh, man. Jason, I could talk for hours on this subject. Wow, I don't even know where to start. He is like, if you could picture the perfect father, dad, like that's how I view him. He's like, he comes to the office every day with this energy. The number one thing I've learned from him is every interaction that you have with a human being, if he doesn't leave that interaction with you with hope, then you probably didn't do a good job. Every time I talk to Herm Edwards, I leave that conversation with hope. And that's the number one thing that I've learned from him, man, is like, I would rather die than disappoint Herm Edwards.
Yeah.
He doesn't have to like browbeat me. He doesn't have to, man, I just don't want to disappoint him. That's the motivation I have every day to come to work, man. I would rather, like I said, I don't want to disappoint the man. And I don't even know how to put a finger on it to describe why. He just does. He just has that presence about him when he just walks in your office,
Mm-hmm. Still up at 4 a.m., Rob? Is he still up at 4 a.m.?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, he's crazy. He gets up at 4 a.m. He's working out. He just had a knee replacement, so I don't know if you know that, and it's been driving him crazy because he's never had to go through rehab or done anything in his life like that. And he's going
I can't
nuts.
imagine. I can't imagine.
He's going nuts, right? He's walking around.
Yeah.
But he's doing so much better. But one of the things that he does that you don't see much at this level is that he hires guys who he believes are fully qualified, and then he just lets you do your job. He stands back and he literally lets you do your job. And then if he believes you need help, he steps in, he reaches his hand out and he helps you, man. And he helps you. And the help that he gives you is constructive criticism. It's positive. It's hope filled. And it just makes you this sense of loyalty that he creates in this office, that everybody comes to work and they just want to do a great job, man. And I hope, pray that one day I could kind of have that aura around me too, if ever I get, fortunate enough, blessed enough to become a head coach.
His faith is strong too. I know this. And I've actually, in all the years I worked with Herm, we didn't talk a lot about faith, but I kind of sensed this man was connected to God in some ways. And then the very last time I saw him, we were in the airport together in 2017. I was literally 2 weeks away from leaving ESPN and going into this job and going into ministry. And we just sat there next to each other at the airport. I think we were both headed to Florida for the Pro Bowl maybe. And we were just sitting there and I talked to him about what I was doing. I was leaving ESPN. I was going into this ministry, and he took out a book, and I think it was his Bible that he carries with him, but he also carries around these quotes and Bible verses and inspirational things that he showed me. And he's like, I look at this every day. I think it was a prayer, and I wish I could remember it. I don't know it, but I thought, wow, this guy is connected to God. This guy makes sure that his faith is important to him too. He just doesn't wear it on his sleeve in the sense of proselytizing every second he gets. But that's a real thing with Coach, isn't it?
Oh my gosh, yes, he's and I don't like to speak for other people's faith because that's their personal thing.
Of course,
but he absolutely, words and actions. We have that on our T-shirts. Everything we do around here is, one thing. He lives out his faith every single day, which is, as you know, the most important thing is just is living it out. And just there's so many times where my past experiences in this profession where, I maybe call a play and it doesn't work, or I did something that I know maybe, oh gosh, I know Herm's going to be upset at me, and I'll just be ready to just get, annihilated. And some of the places I've been before, and then I just look over at him and he's just with a smile on his face.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Like, I got you, man. And like, I just can't tell you, he lives that out like every day. His compassion, his patience, he's just an amazing man.
A couple more questions here with Rob Likens from Arizona State on the Sports Spectrum podcast. You've been around young people a lot. You coach them and have coached them for many years. I'm wondering, from your perspective, what do you see as the biggest struggle that these guys walk through on a daily basis? Faith aside for a minute, because obviously not everyone is in the same place with their faith, but just the biggest struggle that these guys get. What's the commonality among each player that you kind of come across? And it's like, yep, I knew this was coming because he's young and he's an athlete.
It's Jason, it's image, man. It's peer pressure, social media image. And that is the thing that, I probably fight the most. I believe that it's our job as adults to try to teach kids. We're the last door these guys go through before they end up in the real world, man.
Yeah.
And you would just hope that they could think properly, and especially about themselves. And man, the kids, their culture they grow up in now, because it starts so early, man. My son's 9, and if he has a phone, but it doesn't have, like, he can't get on social media. He can play some games, when we're at the restaurant or something on it.
Yeah.
But some of these kids are carrying around phones at 10 years old, 11 years old. They're on social media, and it's all image driven, and it's scary, man. It's scary. They're getting their identity off of likes and retweets. And so that is the biggest fight, is to get these guys to understand, man, your identity, please, man, it is not in that. It is not in that. It is not in what others think about you. It is what God says about you.
And that comes back to the relationships, right, that you build with these guys.
That's exactly right. And so that's where you have to build a relationship to, reach into these kids and get them to think properly. I think, and to just talk to them and get close to them and go, man, because when you get close to a kid, they'll listen to you a little bit, but that's the biggest thing, man, is they're so image driven and worried about what everybody thinks about them.
Yeah, that's so true. As we close here on the podcast, Coach, and this has been great, what's next? How do you prepare here after you come back from recruiting? Your first game, August 29th against Kent State at home, and then you got Sacramento State, and then you got a tough one at Michigan State in East Lansing before you start the conference schedule. What's next as we go through the summer here? Do you get some time off, and then when do the guys start to gather back again?
Yeah, we'll get back at the end of May, and then we will have the first couple weeks in June. We'll do summer camp where we have kids come in. High school kids, young kids, we'll do some camps. We'll even go on a couple travel camps and go out of state, do a couple things there. And then we'll go on vacation, the long-awaited vacation for college football coaches in the month of July, man. Oh, my gosh, it's like gold. You finally get a chance to spend some time with your family and all that stuff. But then, I got my work cut out for me, man. I got to get a quarterback ready. We got a big quarterback race going on. We brought in 3 freshmen. So we're going to try to find out who that starting quarterback is. We got a guy that was here, and he's in the race. And so by the time we reach Michigan State, man, we need to kind of, all right, this is our guy. This is who we're going to go with, and get that in place. That's going to be very important because we all know, your quarterback. It's hard to be good if you don't have a good quarterback.
That is true. That is a football motto that will probably never end, I would imagine.
That's right.
Coach, last two questions here.
Yes,
this one I like to ask from a coaching perspective. What's your definition of success?
Oh, man, that's easy because I thought about it this morning. Is the day that I die is Jesus looking at me and saying, "Well done, faithful servant." Mm.
That's easy.
I don't want him to say, "You fool," as in that parable that story that Jesus was talking about in Luke. Yeah. Chapter 12, verse 13. Read that story of the rich fool. I don't want to hear that. I want to hear, well done, well done.
And that could be on any level, right? Like the success in the eyes of football, the success in the eyes of, achievement, family, all that, it pales in comparison to hearing those words from Christ, right?
That's exactly right, man. Because that meant that there's nothing wrong with making money. There's nothing wrong with having a big platform. There's nothing wrong with being famous, as long as all of those things that you have been blessed with, you're using to build the kingdom of God.
It's really good. Last question here, Coach. Thanks so much for being here. We always ask this to all of our guests. What is the Lord teaching you right now? What are you learning from God in this season of life that he has you today, late April, Good Friday, actually, 2019? Yeah. What are you learning from God?
Life is short, Jason. I'm 51 years old. My dad passed away 1 year ago, very close to this date. And, it gets you thinking. I heard a great sermon from Tony Evans the other day. That an American male, his life expectancy is right around 73 years old. I'm 51. Do the math. I got about 20 years. I want to make sure those 20 years are filled with doing the right things. In the book of Psalms, Moses talked about it. David talked about it. Show me my life's end, God. Show me the number of my days so that I can have a heart of wisdom, and that every day I'm focused on the right thing, not the things of the world, but doing the things that matter the most. And let me be focused on that. And so I'm in that stage of my life, man. I know a lot of young people probably don't want to hear that. They think it might be a dismal outlook on life. I don't, man. I'm fired up about it. I got about 20 years left. I want them to be the greatest 20 years in the world, and I want them to be 20 years help building God's kingdom. That's what I want to do.
You can coach my kid any day, Rob Likens. I appreciate you being here on this podcast. Rob Likens from Arizona State. We'll wish you nothing but the best for the 2019 season, of course. Please say hi to Coach Herm for me, and thanks for joining us here on the podcast.
Thank you, Jason. It was a pleasure, man.
And many thanks to Rob Likens, Arizona State University's offensive coordinator and quarterbacks coach, for joining us here on the Sports Spectrum podcast. Give him a follow on Twitter at Coach Likens ASU. Coach Likens ASU. Great guy. I mean, you just sense a guy who has joy in his life, no matter the circumstances that have been dealt to him in his life. He just exudes passion and exudes joy. It's the kind of guy that I want to be around quite a bit, and just knowing that he has a heart to serve and a love for God. So many thanks to Rob Likens for joining us here on the podcast, and many thanks to Compassion International for sponsoring this podcast. $38 a month. The most trusted child development ministry in the world is Compassion International, and you can make that difference by releasing a child from poverty. Go to the website, compassion.com/sportspectrum, compassion.com/sportspectrum. Pray about it. Click the child that you feel called to basically adopt, and you sponsor them. You sponsor them for $38 a month, and it provides food, education, medical care, and vocational training. The whole ministry is done in Jesus' name. Go today and sponsor a child. Release them from poverty. What a great gift you can provide for someone in need. Compassion.com/sportspectrum. Check out the website and sponsor a child today. Many thanks to Coach Likens for joining us here on the podcast, and we also are so thankful to you for listening to this podcast. If this is the first time you've ever heard this podcast, thanks so much for joining us and being a part of what we're doing here at Sports Spectrum. Do us a quick favor and click that subscribe button so you never miss an episode of the Sports Spectrum podcast. We've done over 300 of them now, and there's so many great stories and great interviews, and honestly, they all tell the same story because they all point back to the name of Jesus and how Christ has impacted each and every guest that we've had on this podcast, how Christ has impacted their lives. So we want to thank you for listening. We also thank those that have been listening for many, many months. And even over the last 2 years that this podcast has been in existence. Thank you to you as well. You can reach me directly if you have any comments, any thoughts, any guest ideas via email, jason@sportspectrum.com. That's my email, jason@sportspectrum.com. And follow us on Twitter and Instagram and Facebook and screenshot this podcast, take a picture and post about it. We'll share it. We'll retweet it on our pages as well. And then check out our website, sportspectrum.com. Bookmark that website because it has content being updated every single day. sportspectrum.com. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next time with a brand new episode of the Sports Spectrum podcast. Have a great rest of your day. Love you guys.